What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about my top 10 favorite Disney animated films. I, like everyone, grew up watching Disney animated films. They were the first movies I watched and understood, and I still enjoy them. On this podcast, I want to give you the definitive list of my 10 favorites. Some of the movies on my list are the classics everyone loves, and some are overlooked gems in the grand scheme of things. I didn't count Pixar films. They are their own thing, and instead of doing a boring list, I'm going to talk about the films in chronological order. That gets us to the first film on my list, 1959 Sleeping Beauty. And what I love most about this movie is the look, from the green fire, the thorns, and the spinning wheel. This film, Sleeping Beauty, is full of iconic images. I also just love the look of Maleficent's castle. This, to me, is the best looking Disney animated movie, and that's saying a lot because I love the way Bambi and Pocahontas look, how they animated nature for those movies. The forest in Bambi is spectacular, but look-wise, Sleeping Beauty is Disney's crowning achievement. The other element of this movie I enjoy is Prince Philip. He's the Disney prince given the most to do, and part of the reason is because the lead Aurora is only on screen 18 minutes, and he's the one that gets to duel an all-time great villain in Maleficent, who turns into a dragon. Also, the song Once Upon a Dream is touching, yet weirdly haunting at the same time. I think this movie, Sleeping Beauty, gets weirdly overlooked because when you're a kid watching it, it isn't as fun and fantastical as those other movies, Cinderella, Snow White. It's kind of a darker movie. I think it's a movie I appreciated more as I grew up, but it's a movie I keep going back to and go, man, this is such a good-looking movie, and Disney was really going for something here. Like, this is so different than their other fairy tale films. It might not be the consensus, but to me, Sleeping Beauty is better than Cinderella, it's better than Snow White, it's even better than The Little Mermaid. That's just my opinion. The next film on my list may come as a surprise. It's 1963's The Sword and the Stone. So many have tried and mostly failed to adapt the legend of King Arthur. And why this movie stands out is because he's a regular kid. There's nothing super special about him. It normalizes the character. This is something Disney doesn't get enough credit for how good they are at adaptations. They also have the best adaptations of Peter Pan, The Jungle Book, and Robin Hood. This movie also has the best depiction of Merlin on screen as a wise yet goofy wizard. His sidekick, the owl Archimedes, is my favorite part of the movie. What gets me about this movie is the lack of plot. It's just a fun movie. Watching a young wart, aka Arthur, turn into a fish and a squirrel, I'll be the first to admit it's an imperfect movie, but its unique nature is what stands out to me. It's hard to make a movie where we all know how it's going to end. The Sword and the Stone, to me, is a hidden Disney gem that more people should discover. Broadway superstar Lin-Manuel Miranda, who has written modern Disney songs, was asked by Collider which live-action remake he would like to write a song for, and this was his response, quote, "I can tell you one of the ones I didn't watch so much growing up that my kids love is The Sword and the Stone. There's something so incredible about when that wolf first shows up to menace Ward. I saw my kid get really scared for the first time, and then immediately the wolf light falls down a cliff and falls on his face, and the laugh my kid let out when that happened was so delicious. It was such a lesson in tension and release and relief, so there's probably something fun in The Sword and the Stone to be mined. I don't know, I'm spitballing." End quote. I couldn't agree with him more. I think this would be a brilliant live-action adaptation because The Sword and the Stone doesn't have to be a $200 million epic. You can make something smaller in scale and still wonderful and terrific that kids are going to enjoy. I hope he gets to be a part of a live-action adaptation of The Sword and the Stone. The 1980s was not a particularly great era for Disney animation. They had flops like The Black Cauldron and good, not great movies like The Great Mouse Detective. There's one movie that truly stands out, and that's 1987's Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Not only does it add a new character in Roger, you also get to see Mickey Mouse share the screen with Bugs Bunny and Donald with Daffy Duck. There's never been a movie like this before or after, and yes, Bob Hoskins sells the movie as Eddie Valiant, but the overall animation is top-notch as well, and a lot of the credit has to go to director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg for making it happen. Steven Spielberg has always had a love and fondness for animation. Here's what he said at AFI in 1978, quote, "I'm so in love with the Disney animators. Why? I think animation is the father of cinema, because they have to have in their mind a clear picture of how a chipmunk rolls over in the snow. They got to know what each side of that chipmunk amount looks like. They don't build chipmunks and roll them over into fake snow. They have to use their imaginations and paint these things, and how the fur moves and how the wind blowing, and it's just that way. I think all directors should be animators first. You really can take the imagination to become something tangible." End quote. It was a massive deal at the time that Steven Spielberg, the biggest director and producer, was working with Disney, and they came together to make an absolute masterpiece. There should have been sequels to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Even so, I'm glad we've got the one, because it is so unique, it is so rare, and I think there will never be another movie like it. It's the perfect mix of live action and animation. That gets us to the era that most call the golden standard of modern animation, the 1990s. And of course, some of the movies from this time period made my list, beginning with 1991's Beauty and the Beast, the first animated movie ever to get a Best Picture Oscar nomination. I want to start by saying Belle is one of the best female characters in Disney history, and her opening song, Belle, is one of my favorites. Here's what producer Don Hahn told Den of Geek about Howard Ashman and Alan Menken coming up with that song, quote, "When that song first came in, I think we were all shocked. Howard and Alan were not sure we'd like it. They were very hesitant. In fact, they came out to Los Angeles to play it in person because we're sending them a 4-minute song that does all this. They're going to think we're nuts. But we liked it a lot and we didn't change it a bit. It's one of the few songs in the movie that we didn't restructure or change or anything. It gave you all that depth in an encyclopedic way and made it entertaining. Otherwise, it's exposition and you'd be sitting there having characters talk and read and it's dull. Now you have the same information, but it's entertainment. But that's the brilliance of Howard and animation and musical theater," end quote. I agree with his take that that's the most important song in the movie. I love the character of Gaston as well. He's an all-time great Disney villain. I think Beauty and the Beast is the best musical Disney has ever made. And my favorite lyrics come from Gaston's ballad. You can ask any Tom, Dick, or Stanley and they'll tell you whose team they prefer to be on. The next movie on my list is another obvious one. 1993 saw another powerhouse come to life at Disney in the form of Aladdin, and this is when Disney decided to bring in a movie star to voice a character. I'm of course talking about Robin Williams as Genie, and for better or worse, it changed animated movies forever. In this case, it was of course for the better. Prince Ali is an all-time great Disney song, and what stood out to me on my most recent rewatch is that both Aladdin and Princess Jasmine are given real arcs, and you can't talk about this movie without talking about the villains, Jafar and henchman Iago. I want to say it really bothered me that in the later films and television show, Disney tried to turn Iago, Gilbert Gottfried's character, into a good guy. I mean, that's just so ridiculous. But I have to reiterate how this movie works because of Robin Williams. Like, if it was anybody else, I don't think this movie would live up to its reputation. Like, I don't think it would still be as relevant because it's in the Robin Williams aura and because we all talk about his legendary filmography, that we keep on going back to Aladdin. Because every time I'm watching this, I'm like, I can't believe that Robin Williams, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, is giving one of his inarguably top 5 performances in a children's movie. That's how insane this movie was at the time and how insanely good it still is today. This got people to care about who's voicing these characters. I mean, after this, Tom Hanks becomes the voice actor of Woody. Mel Gibson is in Pocahontas. The biggest movie stars in the world want to be in these Disney animated films because of Robin Williams brilliantly playing the genie. And of course, none of them are even half as good as he is in this movie. We are halfway through my top 10 favorite animated Disney movies, and the next movie on my list is my personal favorite. The first movie I felt a real connection to, and I'm far from the only one. I'm talking about 1994's The Lion King. The movie has a perfect mix of drama with Mufasa's passing and humor with Timon and Pumbaa. It's a miracle the movie is able to fill multiple tones. A lot of animated movies are one-dimensional. Like from the very beginning of them, they're like, here's what this is, and it's going to continue to be this. But The Lion King is different than that. Like structurally, it changes. The opening is really fun, then it becomes somber and sad, and then it goes back to being a really good time. And that's really challenging for a movie like this to juggle, and I think it does so brilliantly. I was thinking about what makes Simba so different from the other Disney characters, and I think this is it. He blames himself for the death of his father. That's deep for a kid's movie. I also have to shout out Oscar winner Jeremy Irons, who is the voice of Scar. Be Prepared is the best villain song. The Lion King was a massive hit, making $968 million. The songs are so good that they are almost dull to talk about. My favorite is I Just Can't Wait to Be King. I mean, the lyrics, everywhere you look, I'm standing in the spotlight, tells you everything you need to know about young Simba. And that's what the best Disney songs do. They develop the characters. I feel like Lion King is a movie that got so big and so popular that people like to downplay it, like they like to say that it's so mainstream. I just think it's a movie that holds up. Like you just watch it and you're like, this is by far and away the best Disney animated movie. This next film is one that has its supporters, but still isn't viewed as the masterpiece that it is. I'm talking about 1997's Hercules. The mythology is interesting and everything, but what does it for me is Meg. She's just so different than most Disney female characters. She's first working with the villainous Hades. She's got a past. She's complicated, and Susan Egan is all-time good as the voice of the character. Zero to Hero is both a spoof of a hero song and also just flat-out brilliant. I also want to talk about the use of CGI. The fight between Hercules and the Hydra is epic and still stands out. Also, James Woods as Hades and Danny DeVito as Phil are great. Here's a hot take I have. If Hercules came out before Aladdin, Hercules would be the more popular film. But because Aladdin came first and it's made by the same filmmakers and it has some of those similar elements, I think Aladdin is the more revered film. I personally love both of them. There are some days I prefer Aladdin over Hercules and others where I prefer Hercules over Aladdin. I just feel like Aladdin has been heralded as one of the great Disney animated films, whereas Hercules has not, and that's gotta change. The last film of the 90s on my list is 1998's Mulan. This movie gives you great songs like Man Out of You, and also gives you a great sidekick character in Mushu, voiced by Eddie Murphy. I'm gonna say it, I prefer him as Mushu over Donkey and Shrek, and I get it. I may be alone on an island. What I like about the arc of Mulan is she's the hero of the movie, and she also gets to go from clumsy to heroic the same way that Hercules and Aladdin both do. And that's not something you always see out of female characters in these Disney movies. I also just personally view this movie as the most fun of the Disney animated movies, and that's part of the reason I avoided even watching the live action remake and haven't seen it to this day, because it just felt like that movie took out all the fun that this movie possesses. Taking out Mushu is missing the entire point of what made this movie special. Yes, it was action-packed, it had an adventure, it had great characters, but man, the songs were really fun. I laugh out loud every time I watch this movie. The last two films on my list are from the 2010s, and I view them both as underappreciated. I'm not talking about Frozen or Zootopia. I really liked and didn't love those films. The first is 2010's Tangled. It cannot be overstated how great a character Flynn Rider, voiced by Zachary Levi, is. Like Aladdin, but more greedy. And this whole bit about Rapunzel's hair lighting up, again, Disney found a new way to tell an old story. I Have a Dream is the last Disney song I really liked. And what's funny when you read about Tangled and why there isn't sequels and why it's not as iconic as the other Disney animated films, people will say it wasn't a hit movie. People, this was a movie that made over $500 million. How do we live in a world where an animated film makes over $500 million and people act like that's not a lot of money? That's just an insane thing to say out loud. I just think Tangled got overshadowed by Frozen. Frozen is the thing that has become more popular. It's the thing that's garnered sequels. It's garnered Oscar attention. It's been the popular Disney animated franchise, not Tangled. Not a decision I agree with, but I live with it. I mean, Frozen's not bad at all. I just personally enjoyed Tangled. I really like Mandy Moore in this role as Rapunzel. It is a very underrated Disney animated movie, so I wanted to give it love and put it on this list. The last movie on my list is 2014's Big Hero 6. It's Disney doing a superhero movie with a kid lead and hero and a talking robot in Baymax. It's just a movie that felt modern and showed that Disney was headed in the right direction. I have absolutely no idea why this movie didn't become a franchise with multiple sequels. It makes me laugh and is also heartfelt. The illegal robot fight at the beginning gets me excited for the rest of the movie every time, no matter how many times I've seen it. There's an earnestness in it that's not in most superhero movies. And I look at where we are right now with superhero movies, and it feels like we've reached the limit of where we can go with live action superhero movies. Where we haven't is with animated superhero movies. I mean, I grew up in the era where all the animated shows were great superhero shows. The Batman animated series, Spider-Man had an animated series. Disney should definitely make more animated superhero movies, and it should start and end with a sequel to Big Hero 6. Like, this should be a franchise that they continue to work on, because there's really something there with these characters. So there you have it, my 10 favorite Disney animated films. Now, I didn't call this my 10 best Disney animated films because I'm not going to tell you that I think that The Sword in the Stone is better than The Little Mermaid or Snow White, because it's not. And Cinderella is a great movie. These are the movies that I prefer over those more legendary ones. And it would be so boring to do the 10 best Disney animated films, because then you would have to put in Snow White. You would have to put in Cinderella. You might even have to put in Bambi, because those films are just so well made. These are the movies I prefer to watch over and over again, and that's what Disney animated films should do. Get you to watch them over and over again, and then to rediscover them. I didn't watch The Sword in the Stone over and over again as a kid. I maybe saw it once, but now I've seen it maybe 3 times in the last year because it's a movie I enjoy. I mean, that's just so special. There aren't that many animated films I feel that way about. And then on the other hand, there are these movies that have just been a part of my life, my entire life. Hercules, Aladdin, and The Lion King. I saw these movies, I go, man, these are the real deal, and I've continued to watch them over and over again, and then I rediscover them and enjoy new things about them. These are the movies that hold up. And this to me is what Disney Plus is for. It's not for watching the new Star Wars movies or watching the Marvel movies. It's for rewatching the Disney animated classics and watching some of the ones you weren't super keen on when you were a kid, like The Sword in the Stone. I mean, go on Disney Plus and watch these movies one final time. Here's my list of my top 10 favorite Disney animated films: Sleeping Beauty, The Sword in the Stone, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Hercules, Mulan, Tangled, and Big Hero 6. That's my list. I'm sure your list would be very different. This is just a list of movies that I don't think is going to change, because my feeling towards these movies are evolving, yes, but I grow more and more fond of them after every rewatch. And of course, nostalgia is involved. The year I was born was the year that Lion King came out. The year before that was Aladdin. Hercules, I was 3 years old when that movie was released. So the movies of the 90s I'm going to have the fondest of memory towards. But what I liked about coming up with this list is the fact that I liked some of the older films a lot, like Sleeping Beauty and The Sword and the Stone. It's not just because I was born in the 90s. I didn't want this to be the list of every movie from the 1990s. So I like that I actually love Sleeping Beauty and The Sword and the Stone. Disney classics hold up. Who knew? Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So please rate, review, and subscribe.